Here's a video that's going to explain how the tropical and sidereal systems work together in real classic Vedic astrology. To make sense out of this, let's start by getting our heads clear with what astrology really is. Astrology is really an interpretation of the heavens. We look up at the sky, and by looking up at it, we interpret information. So we come to know what's going on in our lives and in the world by looking at the sky. That's the basis of what astrology is. When you look up at the sky, what are the two most important guys up there? What are the two most important, impressive things up in the sky? The sun and the moon. So the two most important things for getting information from the sky are the sun and the moon, and we have to understand how they move through the sky. That's the basis for all astrological systems, and Vedic astrology really is founded on Vedanga Jyotish, a book that explains the original form of Vedic astrology. The astrology explained in Vedanga Jyotish is almost entirely moon and sun, with no other planets, nothing else, and nakshatras, So you can base entire astrological systems just on the moon and sun and their relationship together. Now, we're talking about sidereal and tropical. The relevance of the sun and moon to sidereal and tropical is that the sun is going to be the basis for the tropical way of looking at the sky, and the moon is going to be the basis for the sidereal way of looking at the sky. So the sun and the moon are the seeds of the tropical and sidereal way of looking at the sky. How do you make these seeds grow? How do they grow into the actual sidereal and tropical systems that we use? Well, first of all, you have to be able to measure the movement of the sun and the moon. So think about how you would measure the movement of the moon. So when you look at the moon, what do you see? You see stars behind it. Right? So the way that you measure the moon's movement is very simple. You look up at the moon, and when you look up at the moon, you see stars behind it. And one day you see it's with this red star, and the next day you see it's with these blue stars, and the next day you see it's with these shimmery little stars over there. You see the moon is always with different stars, right? So the basis of measuring the moon, it's going to be against the backdrop of stars, right? If you know the Latin word for star, it's sidereus. So the sidereal way of looking at space is based on the fact that we observe the moon against the stars. That's how that seed starts to grow. The sun, how does that seed grow a little bit into the tropical system? Well, how will you measure the sun's movement? You're not going to be able to measure it with stars. It's not going to be very easy because you don't see stars at the same time you see the sun. Well, you'll need to be able to measure the length of the day and the night. As the sun moves, the lengths of the days and the night change. And so that's how you measure where the sun is, by the sun's own light. You measure where it is. That system is called tropical because tropos means to turn around. So the sun comes up to a waypoint and turns around and goes back. Comes to another waypoint, turns around again and comes up. That's the basis of the tropical system. Both of these systems coexist because the moon and the sun coexist, right? But they're not the same system. That's why they can coexist. Like if I say that I'm in Chicago, and then I say that I'm in New York, that's a contradiction. But if I say that I'm in Chicago and you're in New York, it's not a contradiction, it's the truth. Or if two people are in the same room, that's fine, they coexist in that room because they're two different people. But if one person is in two places in that room, that's very confusing. So the sidereal space is not a zodiac like with 12 signs. It's something else. We're going to see how it gets divvied up into its fields. It's a different thing than the tropical space. The tropical space gets divided up into these 12 things that you're familiar with. The two of those things coexist. Okay? That's how we look at it. The way that you will actually get the 12 divisions of the tropical system is you just take the sun's movement and intersect it by the moon's movement. So this is the beauty of the thing, is that although the sun is the seed of the tropical system, And the moon is the seed of the sidereal system. Both the tropical system and the sidereal system have the sun and the moon interplay together. In the tropical system, it's the sun which is the basis and the moon which is the modifier. In the sidereal system, it's the moon which is the basis and the sun which is the modifier. Okay, so here in the tropical system, you take the sun's movement from solstice to the equinoxes, and then you just divide that by the moon's movement. The moon's movement means from one new moon to the next, or from one full moon to the next. So the moon's going around once. And you can visualize this easily on a clock. You just take the sun as the hour hand and the moon as the minute hand, and you let them go. And every time the moon goes around once and comes back to the place where it started, you put a mark where the sun is at that point. And every time the moon goes around, you put another mark. You're going to wind up with these 12 marks, equal sizes. Those are your 12 divisions of the tropical field. To do the sidereal field, you just do the opposite thing. You take the moon's orbit and divide it by the sun's orbit. But you're not going to divide it by a year, because a year is longer than a month. Right? The moon's orbit takes a month. The sun's orbit takes a year. But the sun has another orbit. The other orbit is the day. Right? It spins around in a day also. So take the moon's orbit of a month. It goes around the sky in a month. Goes through all the stars in a month. Divide that up by sunrises. And you'll get 27 and change. Right? So we call the divisions of the tropical field, we call them rashis in Sanskrit. Rashi means divisions of light. Rash means light, or effulgence or brightness, light from the sun. The sun is called Rashmi. And the sidereal fields we call nakshatras. These are these fields of stars, and stars are called nakshatras because they don't change. Nakshatra means that it doesn't change. Okay, so this is what I'm saying. Two things can coexist in one place because they're two different things. It's like Libra saying it's over here, and then Libra says it's over there. That's like the contradiction between a tropical zodiac and a sidereal zodiac. That's not how we're not talking about that. We're talking about the sidereal mapping is a mapping of nakshatras, 27 divisions. And the tropical system is a mapping of solar divisions, 12 of them. And they coexist and describe the same space in different ways. So now, although both of these systems have existed since the beginning of time, since the beginning of human existence, the seeds of the two systems, and even the fairly full-fledged version of the two systems, has always coexisted in almost every culture. But the use of them astrologically for interpretation, looking up to the sky to get information from it, has not always been equally important. Initially, people used the sidereal stuff much more. The reason being that initially we didn't have as many tools, and we didn't have our mathematics developed so well. So initially, talking about like 6,000, 7,000 years ago, people would look up at the sky and then interpret what they saw in the sky. And if you look at record, this is called celestial omens. It's not really even technically astrology, it's more like a celestial omen reading. So you would, and there's records of this from ancient times, people would look up and say, that Venus is conjoined with that red star over there, that's not good. Oh, great, look, Venus is conjoined with this beautiful star over here, that's nice, right? Or they said, there was an eclipse, and last time there was an eclipse, this happened, so here's our prediction for what this eclipse means. All of the astrology in those days was like omen reading from the planets and stars. They used the stars all the time, because if you try to do omen reading in the day, you're not even going to be looking out into deep space, you're going to be looking at birds and trees and stuff like that, clouds. So the astrological version of the omen reading was only available at night when the stars were out. So in the very, very ancient days of astrology, it was almost entirely sidereal or stellar, right? Sidereal means stellar. But as things progress, as history progresses and the observations try to become more and more accurate, then we human beings develop better tools, telescopes, better measuring devices, right? And we also improved upon our math. so that we could observe more accurately and then kind of know in advance or make a prediction about where something would be. And it would start to become accurate. So as our observation and calculations started to become better, we started to be able to use things that we couldn't really literally see with the eyes, but were calculated. So we could add these borders. We could divide the nakshatra space up into fields, and we could calculate the border of the stellar space. And when this planet crossed the border, we could know by math. And then as that developed even further, then we could calculate where planets were in the tropical space, which is full of blue sky a lot of the times. Now, when you just start to learn a new kind of a math, you need to fact check yourself. And in fact, the way that you learn new maths or improve your maths is by testing, right? And then checking to see if you're accurate. That's what was going on in the early days of the astrological or astronomical improvements. They would make a prediction about where a planet would be and then check and see if they were right. And if they weren't right, they would go back to the math and fine-tune it more until they got it right. And then make another prediction about something else and check that. Right? So there was this thing called Drik Siddhanta where you would have to visually confirm the calculations and then adjust something called a bijam. This bijam was the variable that you could adjust so that your calculations would match the observation. So the important part is that you had to be able to observe the position. Even though you could calculate it, and they started to use the 12-fold solar tropical system, they needed to check to see if their calculations were correct. But how can you do that unless you can observe where the planet is, but you can't observe where the signs are? You see, the tropical zodiac is a division of the sun's path. You can't really see it with your eyes. It's a calculation of where the sun is in space at that time. So what they did was they would make marker stars. They would associate stars with various points in the tropical position. In other words, they would associate stars with being in certain relationship to the equinoctial point. The equinoctial point, the equinox point, was the defining point of the tropical zodiac. So they would get some marker stars and say, well, this star is at a 180-degree angle to it, or that star is at a 65-degree angle to it. So if we see something that's coming by that star, or that's 20 degrees away from that star, we can know where it is in the 12-fold zodiac. But because of the phenomenon of precession of equinoxes, which was brought up by Hipparchus, because of that phenomenon, the equinoctial point doesn't stay put relative to the stars, or vice versa, the stars don't stay put relative to the equinoctial point. So the relationship, if you say, well, that particular star over there is 180 degrees away from the equinoctial point, it's not always going to be true. It's going to drift. It drifts slowly, year by year. So when Hipparchus brought this up, there was some contention about, well, maybe we should just stick with these marker stars anyway. But very relatively quickly and relatively completely in terms of history, everybody said, no, let's calculate the amount that the equinoctial point has moved from the star, and then we can still do this stuff with the marker stars. But we're going to keep the signs fixed on the equinox because by definition, that's what they are, right? So everybody in the world accepted that after a couple of dissensions and confusion in the early centuries of dealing with it, but, within a short time, just about everybody. Everybody that is, except one. And who is that one? That one was India. So let's ask the question now, why? Nobody knows why, but we can think about why. We can make a proposition why. Even the people at that time didn't know. Even the great thinkers at that time didn't know. For example, the great Indian astrologer Varaha Mihira. In his writings in Pancha Siddhanta and Brihat Samhita, he expresses confusion about this. He says, I don't know if this is really right. What's going on? And he says the equinoxes are moving through the nakshatras, but we're not changing anything to reflect that. We're just following this traditional way that it was done before, and I don't know why we're doing that. The reason why I believe the Indian culture didn't change the relationship between the star, marker star, and the supposed equinoctial position at the beginning of Aries is because they liked the way there was something special to them about the relationship of the star to the marker points. So remember what kind of stars they have in India. Remember that the moon's orbit divided by the sunrises, which is 27 and change. So they had these 27 star fields, right, called the nakshatras. And the way that the 27 star fields interplay with the 12 rashis, if you tie them together permanently, is really special. It's really unique. They really click together like they were made for each other. So they didn't want to unclick that. They didn't want to divorce these two, the star field from the solar field. They liked the way that it worked with the Gandanta point, the Gandanta being the end of the fire, earth, air, water cycle. And they liked the way that it worked with their nakshatras, how the navamshas would divide each one into 4 bits. So they said, no, it's important to us. The relationship between the marker star and the equinox is important to us. And they start to develop theories and practices based on it. So they weren't willing to break it apart. However, now let's talk about this reform movement or this new movement in Vedic astrology. Why is there now some rabble-rousers like me who are saying, no, you need to break this apart. You need to end this marriage. Why? Because, unfortunately, although it's really cool how the nakshatras and the rashis click together, unfortunately, the definitions of what the nakshatras and rashis are don't make that valid, don't allow that to be. It's like these two people were not allowed to get married, but they got married anyway. But no, that's not a legal marriage. It's an illegal marriage. The reason being that the definition of the rashis, which is not just the definition from Ptolemy's books or something, from some Greek book, the definition from the Sanskrit books like Surya Siddhanta, like Bhagavad Purana, Vishnu Purana, Padma Purana, like even in the Vedanga Jyotish, it can easily be extrapolated from that as well. The definitions there are that the rashis are based on, anchored to the solstices and equinoxes. Like Pachakra Nabhav Vishuvad Dvitiyam Samasutragam. That's a quote from the Surya Siddhanta. It says that the zodiac wheel has to be anchored on the line that's drawn from one equinox to the next, and also the line that's drawn from one solstice to the other. And that very famous cross, it says the Chatusra Patitastuti, that very, very famous cross that's formed by those two lines intersecting, it's a famous cross, everybody knows it all over the world, is the basis for the zodiac system. And you start Aries at the beginning, it says, and you make your 3 divisions, so you get to Cancer at the top. Bhagavad Purana says the same thing, Vishnu Purana says the same thing. Vedanga Jyotish even says that you have to start a year at the solstice and divide it into 12 segments, right? So it's just defined in the Vedic texts, or in the Sanskrit texts, let's say. It's just defined that the rashis, the 12 signs, have to be based on the zodiac. So you're not allowed to say, no, we're going to keep it married to a star instead. And the way that they define nakshatras in Surya Siddhanta and elsewhere is that they don't have anything to do with equinoxes and solstices. They have to do with stars. The way you calculate a nakshatra is you locate a Yogatara star. You locate a Yogatara star, and then a Yogatara means a very important star, and you have some definition of how far on this side and how far on that side the field of that star extends. Like, for example, Chitra. This important star in Chitra has a field that extends 6 2/3 degrees to either side. It's right in the middle of its field. That's the Chitra Nakshatra. So that definition of what it is entirely independent from solstices and equinoxes, right? So, because that marriage of the nakshatras and the rashis was not allowed to happen by the definitions that are in the Sanskrit literature itself. Therefore, some people are saying, hey, let's give up on this. Let's go back and do it the way we should have done it. A lot of people will say, oh, it's just a bunch of Western astrologers who are thinking that way. It's just a bunch of foreigners who are thinking that way. But that's not the case at all. These astrologers who are feeling this way are Western astrologers, Indian-born astrologers. There's many different people. I mean, frankly, even Lahiri himself, who was the commissioner of the committee that set the government-sanctioned Ayin Amsha, even that person himself, in his very report in which he defined the Ayin Amsha, said, this is just a concession because the Indian people's brains will explode if you make them go to tropical. They will, the right way to time all of these things, the right way to time a calendar is to the solstices and equinoxes. But as a concession, here is the closest, the best Ayin Amsha that will match the way so-and-so used to do it in such and such a year. I mean, even the person Lahiri, who established the Sidereal Ayin Amsha, said this isn't really the best bet, but it's a compromise for the people who follow traditions. So those of us who are saying, well, it's time for us to stop following these traditions that aren't really match with our definitions. That's why we call it a reform movement in Vedic astrology. Right? So what we do is we use tropical signs. We use signs that are based on the equinoxes. But we have the nakshatras on their own. They're not tied to the equinoxes, nor are the signs tied to the nakshatras. The two are independent. So what we do is we have the tropical signs anchored to the equinoxes, and we use Ayin Amsha to measure how much the equinox has moved from its reference star. So we use the Ayin Amsha to move how much the stars and the equinoxes have changed, their relationship to each other. So you can establish the location of the nakshatra wheel in relation to the Rashi wheel using the Ayin Amsha. Okay, I hope that gives you a clearer picture of what we do and why we do it. To give you one concrete example to make it clear, my moon is in Rohini, right? Now, in a sidereal system, that would mean that my moon is in Taurus. It couldn't be anywhere else in a sidereal system with a sidereal zodiac. But in our system, if you let the nakshatras move with the equinoctial precession, the Rohini has drifted now. So it's now Rohini has drifted into Gemini due to the shift of the equinoxes. So my moon is in the sign of Gemini, because that's when you talk about the sign, you're talking about the sun's tropical space. So my moon is in the sign of Gemini in the nakshatra of Rohini. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. If not, go to my website, viktakara.com, put a /tropical on there, and you'll get tons more information about this if you want to research this more carefully. Thanks so much.